Hi everyone, thank you for joining today. We are recording today's session, so please bear with and remember that. We have a great lineup of panelists today representing all angles of the UK energy affordability and debt problems. Yesterday, we saw the price cap announcement with some really welcome bill reductions, with government moving some costs from the energy bill and some reductions in the wholesale cost. So, given that backdrop, we wanted to use today to talk about debt and affordability and the link together. Today, Energy UK has launched a report called Everyone Pays, which is on our website, and we can put a link into the chat for attendees to have a look at. The report highlights the urgent action that's needed to tackle the energy debt problem, not just for those in debt, but for everyone else and all customers who are paying for the debt problem. Today's event and report have been supported by Baringa and their debt experts. Big thanks to James Cooper, Beth Farnsworth, Edward Lonkle, and the rest of the team, and Peter, obviously speaking today, for their contribution and for supporting the event. Um, there is a Q&A box on Zoom, if you all remember Zoom from from the crisis. So please put in the questions into the Q&A rather than into the chat, so that we can moderate those and think about responses. The format for the session is that we're going to go through the speakers, and each is going to give about 5 minutes opening remarks. And then we're going to open up to questions and comments. So there should be 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A at the end. So please get thinking about what questions you'd like to ask our panelists. Um, so I think that is everything we need to do before we kick off. So I'm going to pass over to Michael Brannan from DESNZ, our first speaker from the session this morning. Over to you,
Thanks
Michael.
very much, Ed. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay as well. Um, yes, morning. I'm Michael Brannan. I'm the Deputy Director for Retail Markets and Consumers in DESNZ. As a relatively wide brief that covers energy market stability and consumer issues, and also sponsorship of Ofgem and NISO as well. And we're also, my policy team acts as the interface with Ofgem on the price cap. And I'll mention a bit more on the price cap later, as you'd maybe expect me to. I wanted to start by thanking Ed and the team at Energy UK for bringing us together today. Definitely a really important issue, consumer debt, and one that rightly we as government, but also I know other organisations, suppliers, consumer groups, are all very focused on at the moment. It feels like the right time to be having this conversation. It's clearly a persistent and growing issue, and there's no getting away from that. Um, Maybe starting with slightly more positive news then, as you'd probably expect me to. I wanted to touch on the news from yesterday. So we saw the price cap, Ofgem's price cap announcement yesterday, a reduction in the headline price cap of £117. Obviously, that is largely driven or mainly driven by government action at budget to take £150 of costs off of bills. I think that's a real step in the right direction. It's quite hard fought to get that amount of money out of government at the moment through budgetary processes. So in DESNZ, certainly our ministers were very happy with that outcome, and also really happy with some of the wider work that's been going on at the moment around the expansion and extension of the warm home discount, bringing certainty about the longevity of that scheme, and also the expansion now to, I think, around 6 million households this winter, and also the actions that the government's taking through its Warm Homes Plan fuel poverty strategy. So what you're really seeing there is a kind of real focus from us in DESNZ and wider parts of the government on affordability. And you will have heard over yesterday and the days preceding it, government ministers talking about affordability being one of the key focuses of the government. It really is. It really is front and center of all of the conversations that myself and my team are having with the ministers and the Secretary of State at the moment. So I think it's right that we sort of pause to take some celebration from that, but also what you will have heard the minister say is they acknowledge that this can't be the end of that road and that there's more that we need to do on affordability generally and energy affordability specifically for us. So whilst we're pausing to celebrate, we don't think that this is the end of the road on the work that needs to be done. Um, on the debt issue specifically, I suppose that's where I wanted to maybe jump off and say we know in government that asks on affordability support, targeting of affordability support, and what it can look like will always be part of the conversation when it comes to alleviation of consumer debt. But it can't be the only thing that we speak about when we're talking about alleviation of debt. And I think one of the things that we were pleased to see, certainly on our look through the report that Energy UK have put out today, is that appreciation that this will not be a problem that's solved with one silver bullet. This is going to require multiple strategies across multiple organizations, both government, consumer groups, energy suppliers, and others, to tackle this problem and to look at not only the stock of existing debt, but how we curb the flow of increasing debt in the future. And so you'll maybe forgive me today if I don't speak in lots of detail about what the future government affordability support plans will be, because that's one area where it's harder for me to say much more. But actually in government, what we're really interested on at the moment is hearing reflections from other groups, not only about the affordability side of this, but what other things can we do in the regulatory space or with suppliers to really encourage consumers to act in a different way, to understand how we can alleviate the debt problems in different ways as well. There's a lot already going on in this space as well, which is good. But we probably need to accelerate some of it, and we also need to continue to look for other options. So we know that colleagues at Ofgem have been looking at their DRS, which we're hoping will be launched soon. And that's really the kind of first major attempt to look at how we tackle that stock of debt that was built over the peak of the energy crisis and start to eat into the stock of the debt. So we'll continue to work closely with Ofgem on that and delivery of it. We're really pleased to have been working with colleagues and Citizens Advice on their build out of their debt advice service and the CEDA program in particular, which has gone through its first phase, and we're looking at expansion of that. So really looking at how we can arm consumers with the best advice so that when they are in trouble, they know where to go, they know that they're getting good advice and they're getting it early, and that we've got those strategies for them. The other thing it's been really good to be part of, and thanks to Peter and his team at Baringa for this, is I was in the team previously for a number of years, and I rejoined in September last year. And I think one of the things that's changed on the debt landscape is that it feels now like there is a collective focus among different organizations on how we tackle this. I think Baringa and Energy UK have done some really great work on bringing suppliers, the government, and other groups together to really discuss this. I think I also wanted to say we're going to need to be realistic about this as a group. It is a big challenge. It won't be easy to solve quickly, and there are going to be disagreements along the way about the right way to go. And the reason I say that is that some of the things that we will need to look at and some of the things that are pulled out in Energy UK's report are very difficult things to consider because they get right to the heart of that relationship between suppliers and consumers. And there's a very we need to make sure that we're building trust within the retail energy market, not eroding trust. I think we all lived through the really challenging times when there was abuses of forced installations of prepayment meters. The report rightly points to prepayment meters and the role that they might play in the future of debt alleviation. I just want to be clear that there will obviously be views on how far and how fast we can go on those things. But I think what's really important is that we're finding the space as a collective to discuss those things in a grown-up way and find ways that we can move forward together at the right pace to really try to tackle this problem. So thanks very much for having me today. I will be as candid as I possibly can be about government policy. I'll try and answer as many questions as I can, but I'm also really looking forward to hearing the reflections from the other panelists and people that have joined. So thanks, Ed.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you. That's really helpful. Now over to Peter Hicks from Baringa.
Thank you, Ed. Good morning, everyone. And thank you to Energy UK for hosting this event and inviting Baringa to sponsor it. I want to tell you a little bit about me and Baringa before talking a little bit about energy bills, some of the problem statement as we tend to think of it and frame it around household energy debt, and then some ideas on what the industry can do to solve this collective challenge. As Mike said, it's going to require multiple solutions through multiple parties, and it will take time to implement and to deliver. I hope what I present is also a nice little scene set for my other panelists who are speaking next. But first, a little bit about me. So I'm Peter Hicks. I'm a regulatory economist with nearly 20 years experience in the energy sector. I've been with Baringa for about 11 years, and over the last 4 or 5 years, I've spent a lot of time looking at retail market design, the price cap, debt, affordability, and how all of those decisions and choices flow through to customer bills. So I'm here to sort of talk around those sorts of angles today. But Baringa as a whole, there's a lot of us now, over 2,500 professionals across the world, and we are in a very privileged position, having worked with nearly all major suppliers on strategic, operational, and commercial challenges, as well as with regulators and policymakers on some of the biggest challenges facing the market. Mike's already alluded to this, and I'll keep this bit brief, but November's budget was a really positive announcement and provided much needed bill relief for customers. Yesterday's price cap confirmed that, with a move of £117 coming off a direct debit dual fuel customers' bill. This is without doubt welcome news. But the overall picture is more nuanced, and Michael, you started sort of going into this space in your talk as well. Some of these savings have been offset by rising costs elsewhere, in particular network costs. And energy bills remain under pressure. New costs could be introduced and other costs could rise further. As we pursue the net zero transition, the cost of that transition will not be free. We also need to remember that the price cap was introduced to remove the so-called loyalty penalty. It provides customers a safety net by benchmarking a standing charge and unit rate, but it's not designed to make energy bills affordable. If we drill down away from affordability itself and energy bills as a question and focus on debt, which is the main focus of today's session, that picture is a major challenge for the market, and it's a big risk to the sector's investability and the ability to enable a fair net zero transition. I'm going to go through a couple of high-level facts and figures that are hopeful to scene set some of this and bring it to life a little bit more. And you can find out some of this in Energy UK's report that they've published today. I'm mainly going to refer to some of the Baringa work that we've done, bring our perspective and insight into this. So what we've found is that we know from what's publicly available that household debt has reached unprecedented levels. And you can see that when you look at Ofgem's data, and that's about £4.48 billion. And that's aged debt over 91 days. That's triple pre-pandemic levels. A significant proportion of this existing debt is unlikely to ever be repaid. Our analysis indicates that 80% of that debt is unsecured, which means there's no repayment plan in place. Half of that debt is more than 12 months old, and 1 in 4 households are affected. At the same time, financial vulnerability is rising across UK households. Our latest analysis indicates that 1 in 4 households are now financially vulnerable this winter. Meanwhile, households are facing rising cost pressures. Housing, energy, water, and council tax costs are all rising. The impact is uneven. Those with low incomes and families are experiencing the greatest pressure, and these as the costs they face have outpaced post-tax income growth. What this all does is it manifests itself into costs that consumers pay, and that we estimate that's currently about £59 over yesterday's price cap announcement. That's a weighted average across payment types and the number of customers on those payment types. Customers paying by standard credit face a much higher cost of around £140 a year, which is a lot when you consider the current price cap amount is around about £1,700 for a standard credit customer. I might have that number wrong. But this picture is worrying for many reasons. It's bad for the people that are trapped in debt that they can't afford to repay. It's bad for consumers who are paying bills themselves, doing the right thing, and having to pay for more for others. and it's bad for suppliers who aren't getting paid for the services they provide. More widely, it's a challenge to the sector as a whole from an investability point of view, and it may delay the transition to net zero. What we see is that without meaningful action, this challenge will continue to grow and debt will continue to build up. We estimate that that could surpass £6 billion by the end of next winter, which is likely to result in customers paying more. There are consequences associated with inaction. Now, lastly, I want to move on to solutions, and I'm going to keep this short. Mike's alluded to some of this already. And what I don't have time to do is go into a long, detailed list of all the different things that policymakers and government and the industry could pursue. But through that roundtable that Mike mentioned, that Baringa facilitated and organised, we sort of agreed on a number of principles which could be applied, from which solutions could be developed from. I want to touch on those 4 areas very quickly. And Ed, I appreciate I've got one eye on the clock. So if you give me another minute, I'll quickly canter through those. What comes out of this is that it is a package of solutions that's required, and that there are roles for government, for Ofgem, for consumer bodies, and the industry to play. Let's go through them very quickly. So number 1, support should be provided to those who need it. Enabling more data sharing, the government could work with consumer bodies and the industry to construct a holistic view of household affordability, not just within our own sector, and provide a clear guide for who should receive support. Number 2, consumers who can afford to pay should, and thus lowering the total social cost for all. This requires clear guidance from Ofgem to enable suppliers to pursue debt where it's appropriate to do so. Number 3, address critical industry processes to limit the build-up of debt. Ofgem has begun its change of tenancy review process, which is a welcome initiative, and they estimate from their call for input that initiative alone could drive 20 to 40% of the build-up of household debt. This is a key area to focus on. And lastly, ensure debt and support schemes are optimized and are fair. The government could consider reviewing schemes to evaluate value for money and ways to better target support through existing mechanisms or schemes, or reallocating them to other initiatives without the need for additional funding. Mike, as you said around the budget time, securing what was provided in the budget was hard fought and was not easy to secure. So making the most of what we already have may be a helpful way to think about that. As you said too, Mike, there's a lot to do, and it'll be important to move forward the solutions that strike a balance between high positive impact and political appetite. These solutions will take time to design and implement, and we need to recognize the situation may get worse before it gets better. Back to you, Ed.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Peter. Covering lots of ground there. Thank you. Now over to Caitlin Berridge-Dunn from Utilita.
Thanks, Ed. Hi, everyone. And again, thanks to Energy UK for organising this discussion. I think it's, as Michael said, it's really important that we have that honest conversation and that everyone, on this call, on the panel, and also dialed in, kind of comes together to tackle these problems. So by way of intro, Utilita is a specialist smart prepayment supplier. We were basically founded because our CEO saw that a significant part of the market was essentially being underserved and not benefiting from new technology. And on that note, I kind of wanted to start by addressing some of those kind of persistent misconceptions about prepayment, because it is one of the biggest barriers that I see in this space. We've already kind of touched upon it. But prepayment today is kind of nothing like that old 1970s coin in the meter style technology that people still imagine. Smart prepayment provides real flexibility, so you can self-serve emergency credit to bridge that gap until money hits a customer's account. You can save credit in the cheaper months for winter, during summer, and it also gives tools for suppliers to see if someone self-disconnects, so that we can proactively reach out and see what other support they might need. It is ultimately safe for most customers, and crucially, people choose it. So as part of the Ofgem regs on prepay, we wrote to 27,000 customers and we offered them the opportunity to switch to credit. And only 18, so that's 1/8, took up that offer. That's like 0.0007%, something like that. It's also the cheapest regulated tariff. So it's £183 cheaper, I think, on the new price cap than payment on receipt of bill. So it does have kind of financial material benefits as well. And at Utilita, prepayment customers don't pay a standing charge either. So if they use little or no energy, they pay nothing that day. So it's important that we acknowledge those realities, because ultimately smart prepay is one of the strongest tools that we have to prevent that rapid rise in debt, not just that existing stock, but that steep curve that, is going up to what we say in the Energy UK report, about 7 billion. And we're not just in an energy crisis. This is an affordability crisis, and many households just simply can't afford that energy. And as a supplier, we do, and all the other suppliers out there do a huge amount to support customers, but we just can't solve this challenge alone. And we need to work with government, Ofgem, consumer groups to help address those structural issues which are driving those costs. So the budget changes to remove those policy costs on bills were really, really welcome. And we hope that that's the start of a broader shift to move more of those kind of non-energy costs off bills and into general taxation, because ultimately that is much further and would bring that bill cost stack down. Now, we've long argued for a social discount. I know Michael said they couldn't really talk about that, but it's essentially, a more generous warm home discount, how we can turn that into a proper, targeted, meaningful support scheme. It's only gone up £10 in a decade, warm home discount. So it just doesn't really touch the sides of the problem. And that must be government funded. It can't just be added to bills, which drives up costs for everyone, including those that receive the discount. So those sorts of reforms would make a real difference for those households which are genuinely struggling to make ends meet. But that affordability, as the report rightly recognises, is only part of the picture. And there's also an engagement problem, which we need to work really hard on. And it is clear that many households aren't prioritising energy bills over other payments. And there is that growing group of people that won't pay soon off, but could pay, but aren't. And those customers have been protected in the same way that those in vulnerable circumstances are. And ultimately, what that's doing is driving up costs for everyone. So to tackle this, I think suppliers do need to be able to do more to engage their customers and ensure that they are able to pay and do pay. So as I said earlier, Smart Pay As You Go is a completely different proposition to the old style prepay. It's safe for most people. It drives that active engagement with the supplier. It helps customers manage costs. And most importantly, it prevents that kind of quick spiraling of debt. But the ability to install those meters, it has been very heavily restricted. And you can see that, and I don't have the charts obviously up on the screen, but if you look at the report, that steep curve that goes up, it's steepened significantly since the energy crisis. And it shows that it's those policy decisions that have reduced the ability of suppliers to engage with those customers. And that includes, the regulatory bars, but it's also that negative narrative that puts customers off prepay. And until very recently, there was a really low threshold for suppliers in issuing emergency credit, which has undermined that budgeting tool a little bit. And those restrictions, aren't in customers' best interests. So if we let this unaffordable debt continue to build and build and build too quickly and leave suppliers unable to intervene, then costs just increase. So I've talked about those welcome changes, and it's essential that strong protections for the most vulnerable do remain, but we need that honest, grown-up conversation about how we stop it. So for us, that comes down to two things: appropriate affordability support and that ability to use those tools that prevent debt from building in the first place. Now, I'm sure we'll get into all of that in much more detail, so I'll leave it for now and conscious of time and hand back over.
Thanks very much, Caitlin. Brilliant. So now on to Venus Galaza Mullins from Systems Advice. I hope I didn't butcher that too much.
No, it's okay. It's always a tricky one. Thank you very much. So good morning. My name is Venus Galarza. I'm the Principal Policy Manager for the energy retail market at Citizens Advice, which I think most of you know is the statutory advocate for energy consumers. So thank you, Ed, for inviting us. We think Energy UK's report is very timely with so many discussions happening around affordability and debt, and agree with a lot of the points that are raised in there, including the importance of the holistic and comprehensive approach that other speakers have talked about to tackling the issues, excuse me, and the different stakeholders that are really going to be needed in solving them. This, of course, includes our consumer energy debt advice services, which we are engaging and working with suppliers right now to understand how we can work together and come together to help each other, but most importantly, help consumers with a very much holistic approach and not just looking at the affordability and debt problem in a very siloed way. So if any other questions come up later on today about CEDA, I'd be happy to talk about that. So we recently published our own affordability report, Getting Warmer, which features our latest consumer survey and shows how concerned households are around affordability and debt. But in particularly, it showed how hardship caused by high energy bills is increasingly concentrated among specific groups on low incomes, including people with disabilities and single parent households and others on mean tested benefits. Yes, the new measures that were taken in the budget, of course, is a really welcome step, as others have said. But we're particularly concerned with those vulnerable households getting somewhat more targeted support, and that is needed, I think, as one of the first immediate steps to solving this. Some stats I wanted to actually share, and people can visit our website to get the full report that, again, we just released yesterday. But 33% of respondents, which is like equivalent to 9.4 million households, are worried about paying their energy bills. I'm sure that's not probably too shocking for everyone on this call, but it is a reminder of the severity of this and how difficult households are finding it. Nearly a quarter of respondents also found it difficult to reliably afford their energy bills and have that consistent approach to paying their bills, and of course, energy being one of the highest essential bills that families are needing to cover. And then lastly, 31% of those same respondents, equivalent to 8.8 million households, so again, nearly 9 million, said that if energy prices stayed at this level for another 5 years, it would continue to impact their ability to pay for essentials. So I'm sure I'm not saying anything quite new to this group, but I do think even with the measures that are in place this current winter, there are still households that are struggling. We have been calling for a more reformed warm home discount. Again, the expansion was great to cover more households, but essentially making sure that those targeted households are receiving better support. And obviously, to further reduce those policy levies on electricity bills could make a huge difference for everyone in a much more quicker and more immediate way. And also to ensure renters and those in inefficient and electrically heated homes can access support in the Warm Homes Plan. Renters are very limited, as everybody knows, to how they can possibly keep those bills down because they're not the property owners. And so, yeah, we really just want to kind of focus, I think, in the next few months and leading up even to next winter and beyond, how these more vulnerable households can be and should be receiving more targeted support. So thank you, Ed.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Venus. Now on to Andrew Lincoln from Money Advice and Pension Service.
Thanks, Ed. Just to echo others, thanks for the kind of invitation today. It's great to be here. So I'm talking on behalf of the Money and Pension Service, also known as MAPS. I'll refer to MAPS a bit. So who are we? So we're the arm's length body sponsored by Department of Work and Pensions. Amongst the other things we do, we're the largest funder of free debt advice in England. So our funded services supported over 700,000 people over the last year. What I want to do is in the 5 minutes I've got is start by just setting the scene and talking in the context of rising debt, which obviously poses significant challenge for customers and suppliers alike, but wanted to just really start by recognizing that energy debt doesn't exist in isolation. So our research found that 80% of people in energy debt were also juggling multiple other debts, on average 4. So they were juggling particularly council tax debt, they were juggling water debt, debts with broadband telecoms as well. And interestingly enough, kind of in water, lesser known fact, I think customer debt is close to 3 billion. And there's obviously price rises coming down the track in April, again, in that sector. So I think really those kind of overlapping debts with energy really underscore the importance of holistic independent debt advice. And the benefits that can bring really include, arranging sustainable repayments for customers, reducing the amount that's actually written off, and most importantly, really positive outcomes for customers as well. So wanted also to reflect on some of the kind of themes in your report today as well. And one of the themes really struck resonance with me around engagement challenges. And we know, there's lots of engagement challenges. Engaging people in debt really isn't straightforward. People face complex needs. Often they're not making the kind of rational decisions that, as policymakers, we think they'd make. They can be confronted with too much information, have too many choices to make, and that doesn't really fit with their situation. And also, their engagement can be quite stop-start as well. So, really kind of highlights the need for simple referral pathways into debt advice and consistent messages also really matter for customers. And I think the other point really that struck me was that suppliers just had such an important kind of trusted role to play. And I think it was Michael talked about, trust in the sector. And, that trust is so important given a lot of people might start their debt journey through their energy company or other utility provider. So I think there's just really wanted to kind of acknowledge that kind of important role of kind of early identification of problems, the importance of clear signposting, warm referrals at moments that matter for people. And we've certainly seen the demand for a debt advice rising, which is kind of double-edged in a way, because obviously it's really good that people are getting the help they need, but also that brings its own kind of capacity challenges as well. So yeah, certainly that was one thing from your report that really kind of resonated, and a kind of shared kind of challenge we have around engagement. Then the other thing I wanted to really focus on, and I think many of the panelists have also kind of alluded to this, and it's certainly a MAPS priority, kind of collaboration that kind of delivers results for people. And it's been great, to hear about all the different initiatives underway being kind of touched on. There's lots of kind of government initiatives, lots of Ofgem initiatives underway. Really good to hear kind of reference to the Consumer Energy Debt Advice Service, CEDA, as well this morning. So I think these are all kind of real opportunities to kind of enhance engagement, to share information, opportunities to kind of further collaborate. And I wanted just to mention three things that the Money and Pension Service are doing currently as well. So firstly, we're doing some research on third-party authority to act. So we're really interested in the kind of that kind of process that uh, is gone through, where debt advice providers are seeking to contact suppliers on behalf of their clients, and really interested in the kind of processes that underpin that and how they can be improved. So very much interested in both supplier and debt advice provider perspectives on that. And that's a piece of work we're currently kind of undertaking. We've also got something called a creditor toolkit, where we're really delving into what good practice looks like. And it's something we're going to be publishing over the next month or two, which really puts a spotlight on what we think good looks like when it comes to referrals, what good looks like when it comes to use of the standard financial statement. So certainly something that I think is really worth highlighting. There's some good examples from energy companies within that as well. And then finally, I just wanted to mention also our Money Advisor Network, which offers a free route for companies to make referrals into debt advice. So it's almost our own referral service proposition. So it's a really uh, quick way for companies to access debt advice for people who need help there and then. There's someone ready to kind of be connected at, as soon as suppliers make contact. So I think, yeah, just really to highlight those opportunities for collaboration and great, there's so much going on, but it's a really important thing to actually join the dots between these initiatives and make sure they're more than the sum of their individual parts. And then just to finally close, just with some closing kind of reflections around actually, yeah, reducing debt is really in everyone's interest, as I think, the Energy UK report highlights. And I think, as other panelists have alluded to, no single organisation can really solve energy debt on their own. So it's not something suppliers can solve on their own. It's not something debt advice services can solve on their own. We've really got a shared interest in tackling this issue. And that's why collaboration's really so important. And there's some good work underway, but there's much more ahead to do. And finally, just wanted to really welcome Energy UK's focus in this area as well, including its focus on affordability and debt through its vulnerability commitment in the year ahead. And as MAPS, we're really keen to be involved in that work and play our part. Yeah, I'll hand back to you, Ed, and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Angie. So, on to our final speaker, Neil Pegram from Scottish Power. And just a reminder, if you have questions, please put them into the Q&A box at the bottom, and then we can pick those up. Over to you, Neil.
Hi there. First of all, apologies. My having technical problems with my camera this morning. If my camera was on, you would see that an obvious that I've got more than 20 years experience within the kind of retail kind of debt sector in terms of how haggard I look, in terms of trying to kind of deal with these complex and difficult issues. I suppose from an Scottish Power experiences a lot of the kind of different themes and issues that have been kind of talked about already. So we've got a very mixed customer base. We've got a mix of standard credit, prepayment, direct debit customers. We have high turnovers in terms of change of tenancy and change of supply. So all of those different themes that we've kind of talked about around trying to drive customer engagement. We spend a huge amount of time as an operational supplier, and my responsibilities as head of debt and credit risk for Scottish Power is to manage that debt book and to reduce our debt and engage with our customers and try and get that debt repaid and prevent debt from being created in the first place. I suppose the kind of key things from my point of view, so I really kind of welcome the discussions and I suppose the burning platform situation that we have around the increasing energy debt across customers and the fact that if we don't make interventions and changes within the structure of what we do, then that debt will continue to rise. There are some really welcome things obviously kind of coming through in terms of debt relief scheme and the increases to borrow and discount, but those are temporary fixes that hint at it rather than looking at root cause or doing anything to prevent debt from being created in the first place. So I know that there's work ongoing with Ofgem looking around the change of tenancy process and fundamental changes to that, which are really welcome. From a Scottish Power point of view, we've been very kind of focused on this area as being a key area of pain. And if you want to prevent debt from being created in the first place, then the change of tenancy process and the way that that is currently structured drives a significant amount of that debt to be created in the first place. Seeing kind of various different kind of estimates of how much of the overall debt position in terms of that 4.4 billion, possibly 5 billion, kind of gets to overall across the industry that's driven from change of tenancy. I think 40% was kind of what's kind of quoted within the paper, but to me that's as from what I see across the piece in terms of our change of tenancy debt, from how much debt is created from standard credit customers that came in and are created through the change of tenancy process and are defaulted to that because of that change of tenancy process, then I think that's a low estimate as far as that 40% is concerned. So fundamentally, the changes that are being proposed and being looked at and reviewed with Ofgem, getting them through and implemented as quickly as possible. Really, I think they could, from my own point of view, these types of changes help to turn off the tap in terms of what's driving the energy debt within the area. So speed and being able to move fast on these kind of changes, I think is critical from a supplier point of view. And all of those things are really to drive engagement from customers and build it into the process that you have to engage with your supplier when you move house. So the kind of key root cause for me in terms of the change of tenancy process around is that I can move house. I'm instantly supplied by and have a supply. I don't have to tell anyone when I've moved in, and I can, through intentionally or non-intentionally, kind of forget to tell whoever's actually supplies that property, ignore any correspondence that comes through as kind of part of that, and only really once I built up a debt and I'm then in a debt follow-up process, am I then forced to then engage as part of that process. And you're already in a kind of cycle then of there's potentially a a difficult position to then recover from at that point in time. So fundamental changes to the whole move process. We are kind of pushing from a Scottish Power point of view, and kind of working with Ofgem and the rest of the industry on, I think, is fundamental to the changes that we've got here. I mentioned standard credit. So standard credit is quoted within the kind of paper, so it's maybe 16% of the overall kind of population in the UK. It's 75% of the potential associated debts. It is very much as it's the default product when you don't choose a secure payment method, the secure payment method being direct debit or prepayment, or Field Direct to an extent, then the restrictions around that and how that is restricted. So regardless of any kind of financial vulnerability, that's your default product. And I think there has obviously been the prepayment restructure that kind of took place as far as the rules and regulatory changes that took place accordingly. Those being reviewed, I think, is also fundamental to how the industry kind of takes this forward. Having some but not complete kind of links to affordability. So the D&I rules and those that are kind of there and kind of put in place, you can be excluded from having prepayment, even though your risk of going on supply is low because you don't have any financial vulnerability problems. There's a kind of marked kind of difference that we kind of see kind of across the piece. And the industry is therefore having to then use tools such as litigation in terms of debt recovery, where it wouldn't have done so kind of previously. And I don't think that as an outcome as an industry, that the restrictions in place around kind of prepayment were kind of thought through in terms of, okay, so how else does the industry then look to recover that debt, and what's the consequence, and what does that mean in terms of the impact actually on customers, in terms of being a positive or negative as kind of part of those changes. So I kind of welcome the discussion and the kind of the work that Energy UK, Baringa, and also Ofgem are now doing within this area. I think that there seems to be an appetite for change and an appetite to kind of do more and really try and kind of tackle some of the fundamental problems that we've got. And from a supplier perspective, we relish the kind of chance to help and contribute towards those kind of changes.
Brilliant. Thanks, Neil, and thank you to all the panelists. I'm going to take my prerogative as chair a little bit and just come up with a few points that haven't been picked up on, but hopefully will be relevant for this discussion. We've got a couple of questions in the chat, and if there are further ones, then do pop them in there. But a couple of speakers have brought up trust in suppliers, and actually it's worth highlighting that this trust in suppliers is at an all-time high on a number of metrics that Ofgem, DESNZ, Citizens Advice all track. Star rating averages, the attitudes to suppliers has markedly changed, and that's a really positive place to be. And what we wanted to do in the report is look at the crux of the consumer supplier relationship to ensure that on a positive trajectory going forward. So looking at some of the fundamental sort of transactions between the customer and the supplier, looking at payment types and looking at the sort of transactions and engagements that occur and thinking how those can be fundamentally set up for success going forward. And I think it's been raised that there's a risk here of moving too fast or moving in a way that may damage that trust. But I think what we want to show from this report is if that change goes on at the pace that it currently is, that positive story will change. The impact on bills will go up by £10 to £15, we think, will be the average cost that needs to be passed on to bills. And that is a real problem. I like Neil's analogy of turning off the tap. And that's really the key here, and doing it in a way that really works for customers and for suppliers. So I wanted to just highlight that bit of context. We've got some questions in the chat, but first of all, we haven't really touched on the debt relief support scheme, which is is being delivered this year. And it's quite a tricky, challenging thing to deliver, and is a lot of work to set up, and has a lot of implications for a number of different areas, such as the debt advice sector, for data sharing with suppliers, getting the regs right, the question of fairness. So I wondered if anyone on the panel wants to pick up some reflections on how to move that forward and some of the challenges that are being faced there. Is there anyone who wants to tackle that one? Michael.
Sorry, just coming off mute. Yeah, why don't I have a go at that? So I think, and I know Ofgem are not on the panel this morning, so I don't want to speak for them entirely in terms of the challenges that they have as a regulator on it. I think in many ways things like the DRS typify the challenges that we have across the debt space. So I think collectively what we've heard this morning is that everybody's recognizing the same problem and everybody wants to act. The challenge is that these things are not always no regrets actions. So what we often hear within the department and in the post bag that comes in from our correspondence is concerns amongst consumers who are already paying. It was mentioned earlier that there's a cost in the cost stack that is related to debt payment. There's a nervousness about what schemes like the DRS, which will have some impact on bills, at least in the short term, although we expect it will be at least cost neutral in the future, will have on people's bills. So there's a real communications consideration around that. There's also important considerations around how you structure the phasing of the DRS, with the first phase due to be on those on means tested benefits. I do think overall we will be keen to get the DRS going, because I think it's important that we show that we are taking action on debt. And I think what we don't want, probably across the debt space, we need to be careful that we don't aim for absolute perfection in everything, because it is such a challenging area. But equally, we need to make sure that the consumer protections and experiences are the right one. I think if Ofgem were here, one of the things they would say as the hope out the DRS, and I think we've heard this in what people have been saying this morning as well, is the DRS is not just about eating into the stock of debt that there is at the moment. It's also about customer engagement and building in those right hooks that mean that a customer that's going to qualify for the DRS has to have that relationship, or at least some relationship, with their supplier, so that there is a route of communication, is a really fundamental part of this. And I think is actually the reason it's so fundamental is that the DRS should just be one, hopefully narrow part of the wider debt strategy that Ofgem have talked about, albeit as a first step, starting to get that communication with between suppliers and their customers is really important. So I'm sympathetic to Ofgem, because in a lot of these spaces there's a drive for speed, understandably, but that also has to be balanced against the wider considerations that the regulator will have. I think just on that point of speed, because I think there's maybe some wider questions on that will come up. I think probably what we need to do, we've spoken about looking at this as a suite of solutions, is working out collectively across those suite of solutions which are the lower risk, lower regret ones that you can go at faster, which are the higher risk, harder to achieve ones that need more pause. And the reason I say that is, Ed, it's great that the trust in the market is going up, but that's hard fought and it's easily lost. And I think what we would all not want to see is something where we rushed because we thought it was the solution, and we started to see an unpicking of consumer trust that has and rightly applaud the suppliers for the work that they've done to improve that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Michael. Is there anyone else on the panel who wants to come in on this one? Caitlin.
Yeah, just on the debt relief scheme, I think, and I get these things are really, really tricky to design and deliver. One of the challenges with the debt relief scheme is it's focused on energy crisis debt. And the thing that we've talked about today as well is that steep curve has continued to go up and up and up since the crisis. So if we only use the debt relief scheme first phase to tackle that energy crisis debt, we're still going to be left with a really massive chunk. And that comes back to the point about turning the taps off on the debt that's going up and up and up, and then thinking about the interventions that we can do to reduce the pile and the stock of debt. But I think there is a challenge that it is narrow, and it's a bit of a misconception the debt that we have on the books is all due to the energy crisis, when actually government had stepped in then to do a lot to kind of cap those prices and ensure they didn't go. I mean, they did rise, obviously, but they did. There was a lot of behind the scenes support there, and we had the energy bill support scheme, etc., etc. That has now dropped off, and what we need to do is get that the later part of that triangle.
Thanks, everyone. Is there anyone further on DRS? Otherwise, I'll move on to some questions from the chat. Okay, Andrew.
Just a very quick observation, Ed, linked to one of the questions in the chat, actually. So there's a question, about what we think about data sharing in all this. And obviously, DRS, that first phase is relying on data sharing, isn't it? So it's going to be a good kind of test of how effective that can be and how straightforward that is, and seeing how that works out in practice. So a really good opportunity for learning. And obviously, there's lots of other opportunities from the work that energy suppliers do. Priority Services Register being another example of data sharing where, there's a chance to kind of reflect and learn on what's been done and apply in new contexts.
Thanks, Andrew. Peter.
Yeah, I just want to build on Andrew's point there, and it picks up the first question in the chat as well around data sharing is very important, as we've said, and taking it further between the data the different parties have and bringing that together to have a more informed picture of what a customer's circumstances are will be really important to going further, and especially doing things like trying to target people and identify people at a more granular level. And that includes some of the comments in the chat around people that have disabilities or are in financial hardship. Bringing those data sets together will be challenging, but will be really useful and helpful to inform how do you identify the people and then target support to them in a way that that they need that. I think just a further reflection on the first question in the chat as well around existing support is not commensurate with the individual's needs. I would completely agree with that. The schemes have not been developed to target individuals. They've been targeted, an archetype, if you like, of a certain situation, but it's all blanket level support. It's not tailored to an individual. It's, the warm home discount is, I think it's £150 per customer if you qualify for it. It doesn't mean you need 150. Some might need 50. Some might need way more than that. But those schemes aren't designed to do that. They're very vanilla, if you like, in terms of how they're designed and implemented. But with more data sharing, we may be able to do more with that, I guess is the point.
Thank you, Venus.
Yeah, just picking up on that point, in addition to the data sharing, that obviously as Ofgem's looking at the outcomes-based approach, that we can also be looking at that to see how that can work together with government and think about how we can actually target those individual groups. I think some of the questions mentioned disabled households, for example. So that is something that, as we're thinking about shifting to a more outcomes-based approach, how do we actually do that to make sure that it is more tailored and not just having universal principles across the board?
Thank you. So we had a couple of questions about targeting to the disabled people and their families still facing unavoidably high costs. So that's been picked up. There's a couple of questions about that we have covered. And we've had a question about data sharing, which we've picked up. There's a question around the speed, about why this hasn't been picked up more quickly, and why that's been the case. And what is the realistic time frame for actually implementing changes and sorting this out? So I wondered if anyone's got anything about the timelines or time frame here that they want to pick up. I can see some hands still, but they may be legacy hands.
I'm happy to have
Peter?
a go at answering that question from Jonathan there. I think if you go back to the comments from a lot of the panelists today, you'll point to things that are like there's a need for collaboration, engagement, and working together amongst different organizations to solve the challenge. And I think because of the nature of that sort of solution, it's also a bit of a reason as to why it's taken more time to act on it. Because there's a variety of parties that are involved, there isn't a single solution to this. There isn't a single party who can solve it entirely. And there's lots of drivers, both from a sector level and cross-sector at a household level, that are influencing the challenge itself. So those sorts of dynamics are all in play, which makes it very difficult to say, was the ball dropped? Was something missed out at a certain point in time? That's part of the explanation. It's not necessarily the answer to the question Jonathan's asking explicitly there. So I think that circumstance is important to remember. And I think in terms of the timescales for things, I think Ofgem's looking to implement the debt relief scheme this year, and to run it for roughly 12 months. Some of the other processes and solutions that we've talked about will take time to design and implement, as I said earlier on. But hopefully you might see some things being implemented by the end of this year, potentially into 2027, and you start to see more of an impact at that point. But like anything in a policy development setting, it will take time.
Thank you, Peter. Neil. Neil, do you want to come in? You're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, I kind of agree with the kind of points that kind of Peter was making. I think that, I suppose from our own point of view, from a Scottish Power perspective, we are working with Ofgem on the engagement piece around COT and looking to pilot the process and kind of structural changes and demonstrate the improvements that we can see out the back of it. So in terms of timescales and some of these things, I think the onus is on us to work with the regulator to try and push and drive forward with changes as quickly as we can. If we see that they're going to be beneficial to the sector as a whole and to customers in particular, then we need to be pushing that the solutions are done and delivered in the right way, but they're delivered at pace. I think there's the debt relief scheme should be delivered this year. We should see customers benefiting from this summer. But I think the other things around change of tenancy, I think some of the things are going to take longer in terms of the directional kind of change. So within the paper, it talks about prepayment and some of those changes, and changes to what was implemented as part of the supply license changes around the restrictions around prepayment and do not install. Will take time, I expect, to go through and to be reviewed, and any revisions of those rules come through. I do think also there's a change from a prepayment perspective around the way that is perceived, and I know that was kind of mentioned earlier on from Caitlin's point of view, that it's not there's almost a difference between customers who have experience of prepayment versus the wider kind of view as being prepayment as something very draconian and very backdated compared to what is in effect now from a smart prepayment perspective, a very flexible, manageable, digitally savvy, smart pay-as-you-go solution that's there, that you can have regular top-ups, you can access and use via the apps in your phone. To manage all of that, you're very much in control of what you're doing and using, and it's a fantastic debt prevention tool. And actually, directionally moving customers away from the default position being standard credit, which essentially is wide open to incurring debt, and getting into an adverse and uncontrollable debt solution, moving towards a position of smart prepayment where it's suitable, where it's safe and practical for customers. That's a position that we need to move to. That will not be quick, but I think it is something we need to start to take the steps towards now in terms of rebranding, remessaging, and getting the kind of truths, if you like, kind of out there as far as actually what this solution now is. And customers like this, kind of Caitlin's kind of examples, I've kind of seen exactly the same thing from my own customer base as far as kind of engagement, and customers want to stay and are happy and want to stay on kind of prepayment. The vast majority of customers I have in prepayment are not customers that we've installed prepayment for debt. The vast majority of customers don't have debt, they use it as a pay-as-you-go solution. So fundamentally that the need for how we take that forward and how we kind of then change that position to then try and kind of push that those kind of messages kind of forward to mean it, to allow that we can put solutions in place that can help kind of drive that, I think will will take some more time. But I think the debt relief scheme being implemented quickly, the change of tenancy solutions, I think can be implemented quickly with the right support. So I think those things are key.
Thank you, Neil. You covered a lot of ground there. We're just about at time, Andrew. If you've got a quick final.
Yeah, it's a quick final reflection on a couple of the comments, actually. So really keep it quick. So one was just to acknowledge Alex's comment about the work going on already, which I meant to mention. So energy suppliers and debt advice providers meeting and consumer advice groups meeting earlier this week. Really good, interesting meeting and swapping of insights. And then just wanted to also acknowledge some of the points about the water sector as well, actually. And it's important to look outwards to other sectors and what they're doing. So that's it.
Yeah, there's a question about debt matching and in the water sector, and it's something that energy suppliers are also doing. It's covered in a report, some of the actions that are taken there. Um, I think we're at time now. We've covered a lot of ground today. Thank you very much to all the panelists and to Baringa for supporting today's session. Um, that's sort of it from us, but please do take a look at the report from Energy UK. I've also copied in the Citizens Advice report that they mentioned into the chat. Um, we've got another breakfast briefing on the real impact of AI, which is coming up on the 26th of March. So if this worked for you and this is a topic of interest, then please join that session and sign up there. But finally, thank you very much to everybody for joining and the discussion today. Thank you.